What if I told you that in the 21st century, starvation could be engineered, manipulated, and enforced, not by natural disaster, but by deliberate human design? Right now, on the Gaza Strip, economists and humanitarian experts warn that a catastrophic experiment is unfolding, and its outcome could shape the future of global conflict, aid, and international law. The world is watching, but are we truly seeing what's happening? And more importantly, who stands to gain and who pays the ultimate price? This is not just a tragedy, it's a test of political resolve, economic strategy, and the very limits of human endurance. The Gaza crisis is not only about bombs and borders, it's about the silent power of starvation and the economics of humanitarian aid. Today, we'll unravel the hidden forces fueling this humanitarian disaster, the technology suppressing or saving lives, and the terrifying possibilities ahead. If you think you know the story, think again. Let's start with the basics. Gaza, a narrow coastal enclave along the Mediterranean, is home to over 2 million people. Since 2007, following the rise of Hamas, Israel and Egypt have imposed a near-total blockade on the territory. The blockade restricts not only weapons, but also basic necessities: fuel, medicine, even food. Before the most recent conflict, Gaza's economy was already teetering on the edge. More than half the population lived below the poverty line. Unemployment rates, especially among young people, hovered around 50%. Imports and exports were tightly controlled, with limited opportunities for trade or industry. Yet despite these challenges, Gaza's people built lives, running businesses, sending children to school, even pursuing advanced engineering. But in October 2023, Hamas launched a surprise attack on southern Israel, killing over 200 people and taking 251 hostages. Israel's response was immediate and devastating, a massive military offensive, coupled with an even tighter blockade. The stated goal, to eliminate Hamas. The result, one of the most extreme humanitarian crises in modern history. Over the following months, airstrikes leveled entire neighborhoods. Water and sanitation networks were destroyed. Gaza's already fragile healthcare system collapsed under the weight of casualties and bombing. By May 2025, according to the UN, nearly a third of the population had been displaced yet again. Over 160,000 people forced to flee their homes in a single week. What does this mean on the ground? Picture this: a city where ambulances can't run for lack of fuel, where a single loaf of bread costs a day's wages, if you can find flour at all, where hospitals are so overcrowded and undersupplied that doctors must perform surgeries without anesthesia, where parents, desperate to feed their children, risk sniper fire just to reach dwindling food stocks. The numbers are staggering. The Gaza Health Ministry reports more than 53,000 people killed, most of them women and children. But the most insidious weapon, experts say, isn't the bomb, it's hunger. Let's pause and think. Can starvation really be used as a weapon? And if so, what are the mechanics behind it? Economists and aid experts point to the blockade itself. When Gaza was fully open, about 600 trucks of supplies entered daily. It was barely enough. Since the renewed offensive, some days saw as few as 20 trucks. On a recent day, Israel allowed in over 100 trucks, a number officials tout as progress. But the United Nations calls it a teaspoon in the ocean. The German government bluntly states, too little, too late, too slow. Ted Chabin, Deputy Executive Director at UNICEF, puts it starkly. More than 70% of Gaza's water and sanitation infrastructure has been damaged or destroyed. For children, this is a death sentence. Philippe Lazzarini, head of UNRWA, echoes the alarm. The aid trickling into Gaza is a needle in a haystack. Families are being starved. Meanwhile, the World Food Program and other monitors warn that famine is imminent. Over 9,000 children have already been treated for malnutrition in 2025. Tens of thousands more may be suffering in silence. How does this happen? The Israeli government claims it is targeting Hamas by bombing tunnels, command centers, and so-called dual-use infrastructure. But in reality, the destruction goes far beyond military targets. Human rights groups report calculated strikes on bakeries, water reservoirs, electricity plants. Roadblocks and military restrictions prevent not just arms, but basic aid convoys from reaching those in need. The result isn't accidental, it's structural. Federico Borrello of Human Rights Watch says, Israel's blockade has transcended military tactics to become a tool of extermination. That's a chilling allegation. Are we witnessing deliberate engineered starvation, not as a side effect, but as a core element of strategy? This approach is not new in history. Siege tactics have been used for millennia. But in an interconnected world, where satellite imagery can map every crater and blockchain can track every food package, is this tactic even sustainable? Can the international community tolerate or even tacitly support the systematic use of food as a weapon? The evidence grows more damning. According to the United Nations, attacks on Gaza's healthcare facilities have surged by 400% in the last week alone. Most hospitals are in ruins, unable to deliver even basic care. In one chilling episode, Israeli tanks and drones attacked the Al-Auda hospital, igniting fires and leaving it a hollowed-out shell. Videos show thick black smoke and walls blown apart. International law is clear. Starvation of civilians as a method of warfare is prohibited by the Geneva Conventions. But who enforces these rules when the world's major powers are divided? While Israel says it will not stop until all 58 remaining hostages are freed, less than half of whom are believed to be alive, it faces growing condemnation, not only from traditional critics, but also from close allies. The United States, Israel's historic backer, has voiced serious concerns over the hunger crisis. France, the UK, and Canada have threatened concrete actions, including sanctions, if the offensive and restrictions on aid do not cease. And yet polls show 82% of Israelis support the forced displacement of Palestinians from Gaza. Inside Israel, the narrative is of existential security. Outside, the world increasingly sees a humanitarian catastrophe with little justification. We must ask, what is the real endgame? Some inside Israel point to a secret blueprint called Gideon's Chariots, aimed at displacing much of the Gazan population and seizing more territory. Others believe the current military approach can break Hamas's hold, allowing for reconstruction and coexistence. But most international observers are skeptical. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres warns, Palestinians in Gaza are enduring what may be the cruelest phase of this cruel conflict. The economic impact is staggering. Gaza's GDP, already minuscule, has collapsed further. Food prices have soared. Black markets thrive as desperate families barter what little they have for essentials. Meanwhile, the region's infrastructure, roads, bridges, power grids, lies in ruins. The cost of reconstruction, once fighting ceases, will likely run into the tens of billions, and who will pay? Then there's the question of opportunity cost. What has the global aid system sacrificed to keep Gaza afloat, even at this minimal level? Dozens of organizations have rerouted resources, while countries like the U.S. debate whether to restore funding to UNRWA, the main aid lifeline for Palestinians. And crucially, Gaza's fate may set precedents. If one side can block aid, destroy food supplies, and starve a population with impunity, what does that signal to other regimes worldwide? Does this crisis mark a turning point, a new era of siege warfare, where hunger is the most powerful weapon? There are no easy answers. As a recent European policy expert Saskia Kluit put it, all this, combined with the declarations on the Gazans by members of the Israeli government, makes it very hard to ignore that these acts point in the direction of ethnic cleansing and genocide. Internationally, the debate rages. The future of Gaza hangs on uncertain factors. Will more aid be allowed in, under international pressure? Can ceasefire talks, currently stalled, bring relief? Or will the humanitarian disaster deepen, forcing millions to flee, perhaps permanently, from their homes? As fighting drags on and famine looms, the world faces an urgent dilemma. Will the economics of starvation become the new normal in warfare? And if so, what does that mean for international law, humanitarian aid, and global stability? In the second half of this investigation, we'll examine possible solutions, the role of new technologies in breaking the blockade, and the high-stakes negotiations underway. But before we get there, consider this. If the world cannot, or will not, stop starvation in Gaza, who might be next? Let's turn our attention from the burning present toward the roads ahead. The question is hanging in the air. Can Gaza's blockade be broken? And if so, how? What does the future hold for this wounded land and its people? And what does this moment teach the world about power, resilience, and moral responsibility? The world is watching, a phrase we hear often, sometimes emptily. Yet in Gaza's case, the gaze truly matters. Images of malnourished children, drone footage of razed neighborhoods, desperate messages from doctors seeking fuel and bandages fill global media feeds. International outrage is not just a mood, it's building into tangible, if delayed, pressure. Nations like France, the UK, and Canada are now openly threatening to take concrete actions, including sanctions if Israel doesn't allow meaningful aid and move toward ending its military offensive. But what could actually break the blockade? The mechanics are daunting. Israeli military policy, codified under plans like Gideon's chariots, tightly controls borders and crossings. Even as 100 or so trucks of aid trickle in daily, UN officials note this is a teaspoon in the desert compared to the 600 trucks needed every day. Humanitarian corridors remain at the mercy of negotiations and ceasefires, which are themselves hostage to political agendas, military objectives, and the enduring thorn of hostages and combatants on both sides. Let's examine 3 scenarios, each with its own risks, opportunities, and consequences. First, the status quo persists. Periodic military escalations, harsh restrictions, and little meaningful change. In this scenario, Gaza faces prolonged suffering, famine, the collapse of healthcare, and the psychological scars of a generation growing up amid rubble and deprivation. Humanitarian aid will keep arriving, too little, too late, too slow, to borrow Germany's condemnation. Diseases will spread along with malnutrition. As Ted Chaban from UNICEF warned, more than 70% of Gaza's water and sanitation infrastructure has been destroyed. Basic survival itself becomes a daily struggle. Second, a more apocalyptic scenario, forced displacement on a mass scale. Recent polling reveals that 82% of Israelis support the wholesale removal of Palestinians from Gaza. Combined with military plans, this raises the specter of ethnic cleansing, a term now used by human rights monitors and even officials like Saskia Kluit from the Council of Europe. In this case, Gaza's fate would echo some of history's darkest chapters. The international community might respond with sanctions or war crimes proceedings, but such processes are slow and uncertain. The human toll would be catastrophic. And third, the path of hope, however narrow. Sustained diplomatic and grassroots pressure leads to a significant opening, a negotiated truce, or even the deployment of an international protection force. In this best-case, though unlikely scenario, the blockade is relaxed as the world recognizes the necessity of decoupling aid from military objectives. Technology and innovation might play a role. Drones for airdropping food, field hospitals powered by solar grids, or digital verification to protect aid from diversion. But even then, the massive challenge of rebuilding physical infrastructure, social trust, and hope would remain. Yet underlying each scenario is a hard truth. None of these outcomes are predetermined. They depend on choices by diplomats, soldiers, politicians, activists, and ordinary citizens across the globe. The international system, imperfect and slow as it is, has levers: diplomatic pressure, sanctions, legal cases, media scrutiny, and crucially, the solidarity of civil society. History offers examples. The Berlin airlift overcame a Soviet blockade through technological ingenuity and international resolve. South Africa's apartheid crumbled under pressure from a global boycott campaign. The lesson? Even the most entrenched blockades can be broken, not just by armies, but by networks of conscience and creativity. What about the Israelis themselves? Polls show a majority back harsh measures, but dissent is growing. Alon Lee Green, a leader in Israel's civil resistance, said, "Refusing to answer the call-up is our most powerful weapon. No soldiers, no occupation." These voices are still marginal, but every movement begins small. So, what can actually make a difference now? As experts emphasize, 3 levers have the greatest immediate impact. 1. International governments must not just make statements, but attach real consequences to their demands, through sanctions on officials, arms embargoes, or conditioning aid on respect for humanitarian law. 2. Media and civil society can keep Gaza's crisis at the top of the world's agenda. The more uncomfortable political leaders feel about inaction, the more likely they are to act. 3. Support for organizations that deliver aid, UNRWA, UNICEF, Doctors Without Borders, and others, needs to be sustained and, where possible, shielded from political interference. Recent debates about restoring funding to UNRWA could be a game changer if resolved quickly. But this isn't just about geopolitics and big institutions. There are practical lessons for each of us, as viewers, as citizens, as people with a conscience. First, understand the reality. The term engineered starvation should shock us into awareness, not numb us. Felipe Lazzarini, head of UNRWA, compared the current aid flow to a needle in a haystack. Families are being starved. Food is not just missing, it's being denied as a weapon of war. Recognizing this and naming it is the first step to fighting it. Second, don't look away. Whatever your politics, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza challenges basic human values. We are all connected. and indifference feeds tragedy. Sharing information, amplifying the voices of those suffering, and supporting journalism from the ground all help break the cycle of silence. Third, pressure your leaders. Write, call, protest, vote. However you can, make clear that inaction is not acceptable. Many governments have started to shift their rhetoric only after seeing public outrage. Fourth, support relief efforts. Financial donations, volunteering, even digital advocacy campaigns help organizations that save lives daily. In times of chaos, even small contributions can make the difference between life and death for someone. And finally, reflect on the lessons for our own societies. Gaza's story is not just about war and blockade. It's about what happens when the machinery of politics overrides the needs of ordinary people. It raises the question, where else in the world are similar dynamics unfolding, where blockade, deprivation, or deliberate neglect are being used as tools of control? What would you do if it were your community? Now let's return to the main intrigue. Can the blockade be broken, and what solutions might actually alter Gaza's fate? The answer is yes, but with enormous difficulty, and only if international resolve is sustained. Technological innovation can alleviate suffering but cannot substitute for political courage. Economic assistance and reconstruction funds can rebuild homes, but only if the siege ends. The fate of Gaza, like so many crises, will be decided not just by governments but by the sum of millions of human choices, from the halls of the UN to the streets of your city. And here's a secret fact that rarely makes headlines. Despite everything, the people of Gaza continue to create, to sing, to learn, and even to plant gardens amidst the ruins. In interviews with aid workers, they say that hope, however fragile, is their most powerful weapon. One teacher put it this way: they can destroy our buildings, but not our hearts. So, what will you do with this story? Will you share it? Will you challenge indifference when you encounter it? Will you support those on the front lines of relief? The blockade can be broken, but only if the world decides that enough is enough, and that engineered starvation, anywhere, is an offense against us all. If you found this video informative, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. Leave a comment with your thoughts on what countries and citizens should do next. And if you want more deep dives into the world's toughest questions, make